I'm speaking with Cara Dixon, co-founder and director of Relative Motion, with background as a dance educator, adjudicator, choreographer. We spent a lot of time definitely talking about their business, Relative Motion, where they focus on integrating the concepts from anatomy into the dance studio, helping dancers learn how to promote strength, alignment, build resilience and longevity for themselves, and help get them to that next level of dancing, whether that is in a career of dancing, just wanting to progress in some of their skills, work on feedback that they're getting. We talk about some of the different ways that there are trainings available for dancers and dance teachers, as well as their specialized color block paneled apparel that can be utilized as part of that, and so much more. To learn about those things, make sure that you listen to the entire episode. Welcome back to another episode of Dance Med Spotlight, where we talk about all things dance medicine and dance science. Today, I am excited for my guest, Cara Dixon. Welcome.
Thank you.
So my very first question for everyone joining me is, tell us a little bit about who you are, first of all.
Okay, well, that's kind of a wide open question, so I won't go on forever. But right, I'm the director of Relative Motion. Relative Motion is a dance technique training program that the concept is bringing anatomy to sight for a dancer. So a lot of dancers tend to be visual learners, and what we've recognized in teaching a wide range of dancers, from beginners to dancers who dance frequently but aren't like really focused on a serious career in it, to people that are training to be professionals, like pre-professional to professional level. And what we were recognizing is that a lot of dancers, when they're trying to get to that next level, they're trying to figure it out visually, and their like most strong visual element is looking at a dancer that's more advanced than them, which ends up, instead of having them have that self-awareness of what they're doing, it has them more like mimic shapes and lines and concepts. And so dancers might physically make the shape of something, but they're not fully integrating the awareness of their body doing it. And so they really struggle to get to their actual potential, and then also to sustain that safely into a career. And so that's the whole basis behind our program at Relative Motion. Other than that, like, I was a professional dancer. I've taught in many different many different environments, from being on faculty at Broadway Dance Center to being at the university to being at highly competitive studios to being at performance-based studios. So just kind of the gamut of what professional dance and getting dancers to that next level looks like in different learning environments. And I'm also like a mom of 3 little boys, and just, living that life as well. So, a couple of little details from all aspects.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I love this idea of bringing anatomy into the dance studio and learning the technique of dance, learning how to be safe in the things that they're learning how to do, because it really does make such a difference in being able to access things and figure things out. It's such a
Yeah.
powerful piece of information.
It's like a deep unlocking.
Yes.
Like, dancers come in and they have what they feel is what they're capable of in that moment. But the second they really understand, okay, my teacher's been saying, activate my inner thighs, but I don't really know what that means. I think I'm doing it, but I'm not really sure. And then once they're like, oh, you're talking about the green panel. And like, when you say activate, you don't mean like clench and grip, you mean extend it in this direction. So with our company, we talk really about simplifying cueing for dancers, where it's like you want them to understand the terms, but they also need to understand physically what that is. And instead of
Mhm.
just like making that muscle work, we want them to work directionally and energetically. So, how do we get them to understand, okay, we want you to activate the hip flexors. We don't want you to grip the hip flexors. We don't want you to close off the hip joint. We want you
Mhm.
to activate. We want you to lengthen, elongate, find space, but also make that muscle powerful enough to really accomplish what we're asking. And it's funny how fast, when dancers start to understand that, they're like, oh, that's what you've been asking me to do, And it's
Mhm.
really, I mean, it's just always goosebump moments because you're like, you see those children or those older dancers unlocking, and they're like,
Mhm.
wow, my potential is actually much higher than what I was thinking it was. And it's hard still, but it's not that kind of hard.
Yes.
It makes it
Yeah.
possible. It makes like bigger goals actually within their reach. Whereas before they're a little bit like, I want that, but is it for me?
Mhm.
So it's really
Mhm.
special.
One thing that you mentioned sort of as like a little teaser in there that I wanna talk more about too, you mentioned, like, activate the green panel. So for people who are not familiar with your specialized leggings and things, tell the people a little bit about what you have there.
Oh, absolutely. So, well, we were recognizing as we were developing our program, and just even before that was an idea, is we were like, um, the body is so complex. So when we use longer terms like tibialis anterior, it's the dancers understanding it minimizes because they really don't have access to what that really means. And it's hard for them to memorize that. It's hard for them to really like figure out what's my teacher really saying. And it's hard as teachers to continue that type of learning process because the gains aren't as good
Mhm.
as making shapes for younger dancers. And so what we realized is, hey, what if we could simplify this? What if we could make it visual instead of a hypothetical muscle that the dancers can't really see? Could we pinpoint the top muscles that we cue all the time? So the lower body is very complex. The body in general is very complex. So the more complex you make the apparel, the harder it's going to be for those dancers still to like really take it in. So you're like, okay, what are
Mhm.
we cueing all the time? And if we could bring this to life on a dancer's body, would they have access to what we've been cueing? And then from there, we were like, okay, then we're going to make it, color blocks for different muscle groups. All the joints are going to be black. So they know if it's like we're something we're supposed to protect, something that we're moving most likely to injure, it's black. And
Mhm.
then also like activating certain things like our T bands mesh because it's not a muscle, right? But it's still very
Yeah.
important. We want to cue it. We want the dancers to understand endurance, safety, stability. And so all these concepts that are really high level, we've brought it down to blue, purple, green, black, and we start to cue dancers in that way. So, can you feel that green panel? Okay, if you can't
Mhm.
feel that green panel activating or you don't feel that muscle changing, you're not using it. And so, if you're going into this exercise and you don't feel that green panel, you're not going to accomplish the turnout that you're hoping to accomplish. You're probably going to use the purple panel of the quads, like for a little teaser.
Yeah.
Um, and once that panel starts to grip or fire up, and it overtakes the other things. And so we try to make huge high level concepts very can you see, can you feel, and in a way also bringing that yes no of dance. Like a lot of times dance is very like you're actually not doing it right, you're not in the right alignment, you're not this, you're not like
Mhm.
that, look in the mirror, blah blah blah. It's a very yes no type of training. And so for us we're like, can we also instead of yes no have them get to that yes, but do it through curiosity. So, can we be getting the dancers to ask themselves the questions, okay, I don't see my green panel, but why don't I see it?
Mhm.
Or I saw my green panel in the beginning of the exercise, but now I can't keep that going. What panel wants to work instead now? And why at that moment did it switch over to that other muscle group? Because there's so many answers in there that if we can get the dancers to start to ask themselves, they can get to that next level really
Mhm.
quickly because now they have the answer, you
Yes.
know?
Yes. Well, and one of the things that I really appreciate with the panels also, so I'm a physical therapist who works with dancers. I've had particularly some of my hypermobile dancers who have a hard time even just feeling things sometimes in their body or getting things to activate in the same way without really having to think about it. I want them to have cues and reminders of some of their alignment or what they're feeling or that kind of stuff. And rather than having to put stickers on every day when they're working on something or whatever, I have definitely said, "Hey, there are these this apparel that you can use that already has things color coded for you, that can give you those visuals as you're practicing these things to reinforce what we're talking about. And so that has been a really cool thing to be able to integrate as a clinician working with folks too.
Yes, absolutely. And getting them, because that's what we used to do. We used to like get the chalk out and get the stickers, and like then the sticker would pop off and you're like, no, 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 not yet, and trying to get them back into like the zone. But yeah, that's such an interesting perspective from a PT side of it as well, because a lot of PT concepts are very valuable for dancers. And it's hard because not every dance teacher is going to be trained to that level. They're
Yep.
not gonna all, and not that some of them won't have the time to train to that level. Some of them it's just very complex and they're doing other things, or studio owners especially, or, they're integrating so many things other than the technique. They're in the office and doing all these other things. And so it's interesting from a PT perspective because that's a whole nother level of your understanding that you're trying to impart on these younger dancers. And it's so valuable. And it brings in a whole element of cross training when hey, not only are these dance exercises good, but these training exercises that might not normally be used for dancers in a typical studio space are going to train you to that next level. And one thing that we love in our company is figuring out what we call like cross functional training, where versus like cross training where it'd be like dance and Pilates and yoga, where they all can work hand in hand and train different muscles different ways. But they're their own thing. We work with studios and we're like, what are the fundamental things that your dancers are constantly getting feedback on? Are they constantly hearing across all genres and age levels, hey, we need you to use more plie? Well, if you can actually train the plie, those high level skills that you feel like you're really working on are actually going to come really quick, because now the only thing that's holding back that really high level skill is that they never had the plie,
Mm-hmm.
And so it feels like we're going back to basics, but really if you can train the plie, you're not just training the soda shaw, you're also training the pirouette, you're training the extension, you're training any landing you do, any push off to a great height. And so we're like, if you can find these cross functional things that you consistently see your dancers are not hitting in their higher level skills, it's most likely coming from the tendu, the plie, the external rotation, things that overlap and we're consistently saying. And so I bet in PT, you probably see that all the time as well.
Yes, most definitely. It's so often just needing to take things back to basics. And maybe, over the years, we've developed a weird habit where a certain muscle just wants to do a little bit more than something else, or we didn't know how to access some of the muscles that would be more efficient to be using and not having to work so dang hard, or whatever the case may be. And so, yeah, I mean, when you're in a class, and especially group classes, which are by far the most common way that we train, there's only so much feedback that a given instructor can give to an individual in the class to be able to figure all of those different pieces out. And not everybody has the means, whether it's time, money, whatever, to be able to do private lessons all the time to work on those things either.
Right, absolutely. And I'm sure, like you reference the group setting, you just look and some classes have 30 or 40 dancers.
Mhm.
And a lot of dancers, they cannot do it right if they haven't felt it right in the first place. And so I think dancers consistently do the same things over. They have these like, they have these the way their muscles are trained, like the muscle memory of how they do that exercise. And unless as teachers we're like hands on each dancer as if we're in a private, but like you said, when you're in that large group class, that's not reasonable. I mean,
Mhm.
we can get to some dancers on some exercises, but we can't get to every dancer on every exercise. And so the
Yes.
limitations as a teacher too, and you feel like, I'm sure, halfway through the class, you feel like the class is almost over and you haven't accomplished what you were hoping your dancers would accomplish. And as you referenced like earlier with the apparel too, as a teacher, you can kind of stand back and say, all right, am I seeing the green panel?
Mhm.
And you can look and see everyone at the same time. And if you can't, that's the dancer you run to and pinpoint, okay,
Yeah.
hey, I don't see your green panel. I'm going to come over to you and be hands-on, because if you can feel it and see it the first time, you can feel it and see it again.
Mhm.
And that's kind of the beauty of getting dancers and being hands-on and having privates if people have access to that. But if not, this is literally like the hands of the teacher consistently on that dancer all the time.
Most definitely. Yeah, it makes me think of, so I also train and compete in a style called West Coast Swing. And when we're at events and taking classes, sort of, convention style, some of these classes, especially at large events, like there was one brand new beginner class, like an intro to West Coast Swing that was offered for free in Seattle at an event a year or two ago. They had over 400 people attend that beginner
Whoa,
class. And so there is no way that
no.
2 instructors, and I don't know if they had assistants or not, that they are getting around to even 10% of those people, much less the entire class. So yeah, I mean, anything that we can do to make things a bit easier for everyone involved is a wonderful thing.
Yes, and to just give that personal experience, because like in a convention class, we last season we were with Revel teaching at their conventions, and what we would do is we would adjudicate all weekend. We'd see the major technical things that were going on the stage, and then plan classes for each age group based on the like highest technical thing that we like saw. So, this age group's really struggling with matching parallel preps to parallel turn, like, or turned out preps to turned out turns.
Mhm.
Let's break that down in a really quick paced class so that they can access that before the end of this hour. But the cool thing about it is the dancers that had the apparel in the class, you can, even in classes of hundreds, you can look over and be like, hey, more blue panel, and then just keep kind of going, because
Mhm.
it's so clear and it's so accessible to,
Yeah.
we don't see your blue panel, activate or engage this, activate this, a quick correction and get them to do it. But yeah, like, wouldn't that be cool if in your class you were like, oh, I was seen, because now you're seen in
Yes.
a massive group, or like, now I feel like I gained a little more value from this great big group space that maybe
Mhm.
potentially you wouldn't have had in a group of 400.
Right, exactly. I have no idea how they managed that, but they did somehow.
You're like, keep coming in, everybody.
Like, exactly. So I want to sort of shift gears a little bit. So I know that you all also offer things like online training and teacher trainings and things like that. Share a little bit about what those different offerings are as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So with our teacher training, our goal in that is to get teachers to access all high level technique from its most fundamental levels. And so as we were creating our apparel, we were like, people want the apparel, but there's not really a dedicated like answer. Like, you could
Mhm.
take the apparel and just be like, I know what the muscle groups are, but so it's still, the muscles are still complex, right? And so we were like, how can we make this such a no-brainer? So if a teacher has, they're a total like competitive dance teacher, they also have gone to school for physical therapy, they're like, they really understand the body in and out, they're going to gain something from this. But also, what about that teacher that really has never cued in this way? And they're just like, I actually don't even know where I'm starting with this. How can that feel inviting to that teacher, but also challenging for the other teacher? And what can we create that'll bring this process together? We take the anatomy, we simplify it. And so it's a new way of thinking for the teacher that might be, completely certified and trained and have all these different levels of understanding, but it's not too crazy for a teacher that's like, I'm just starting, is this going to feel like too much? And so we came up with a formula, and in our formula, that's what our whole teacher training is built around. But it's an idea of, if we can train dancers this way, no matter what level they are, we can get them to understand these skills within a single class. And we're
Mhm.
like, how do we break something down that's so standardized that it can maximize a teacher's time? Because we don't have the time,
Right.
right? And then also be really results driven. We want these dancers by the end of one class to really leave going, wow, I know more about my body. I understand that technique. I saw major gains. I am excited to come back. I want to practice at home. Like, how can we get that result in a single class with our program? Right. And so we started there. And we launched our teacher certification. And then teachers were like, hey, the main thing I'm nervous about is like, do we wipe our whole schedule and just make every class a relative motion class? And so we started talking behind the scenes at our team. And I was like, well, that's not accessible for everybody. And we want this to be accessible. And so we went in and we were like, okay, formulas work, like reverse engineering works. We
Mhm.
don't do it a lot in dance, but major corporations do this goal this way, sports
Right.
create goals this way. So I was like, let's take what we know teachers want and why don't we find a formula to reverse engineer an entire year for them? And we created Curriculum Plus, which is essentially not giving teachers curriculum, but it's looking at your whole program. Okay, how is your structure designed? Where is your faculty thriving? Because we all choose our faculty because it's a unique voice to our studio space, right? Everybody's
Mhm.
faculty is different. We're not going to find the same people at every studio in our area. So it's like that's the gold of the studio is your faculty, is your teachers. So how do we look at our faculty, really pinpoint their unique strengths? Like, why did you hire them? What fires them up in the studio? What gets their dancers results? Hold on to that stuff and then within that faculty, say, hey, where are you having the most corrections? Where are you saying the most corrections? What do you find this? Where do you find your dancers struggle to understand something? What levels are your dancers struggling to get between? So do you get to your like 7 to 9 dancers and they were doing great in the babies and they're thriving, they're loving dance, but now it gets a little more competitive and they struggle to get to that next, they're not ready for the next level, but they can't stay here. Like, where in
Mhm.
the program does that sort of stop and go happen?
Yeah.
And then from there, find the patterns. Okay, what are the patterns in these moments? Why is that happening? Because one thing that struck me, and I'm sure you saw this a lot too, is I had adjudicated for like a decade or whatever. And then COVID hit, right? And so before I was like, okay, each region has their own like corrections, and you go to another city and it's like a whole set
Yeah.
of things you feel like you're saying all the time. Then when COVID happened, it was like block scheduling.
Mhm.
And so now you're like, wait, this isn't a regional correction. This is this studio. I'm saying these same things over and over again for this block. And then it shifts to the next studio's block. And those, we're not really saying that anymore. We're saying like a whole new set of things, right? And a whole new set of
Mhm.
corrections. And so we were like, oh, what's going to work for them isn't going to make this studio thrive. This studio needs a whole nother, like, pinpointed, really customized year.
Mhm.
And so looking at the patterns, we're like, let's get them to look at the patterns. What are they saying? What are their critiques if they're a competitive studio? What are your critiques saying? What do you feel like your hip hop teacher's saying? And even though the like direction of it and like the angle of it is going to feel different. It's not going to be plie, right? Your hip hop teacher's not going to be like, use more plie, but they might be like, our dancers aren't really grounded into the floor. They're not really finding a groove in their movement. Your tap teacher might be like, we're not getting the sounds. They're not getting their taps down. They're not grounded. They're not this or that. But the lyrical teacher might be like, they're not using their plie.
Yeah.
Right. Essentially, we have the same issue across the board and how the dancers aren't understanding this. And so, what are our patterns and how can we streamline what every teacher's saying to be your curriculum for the year?
Mhm.
Right. And so, if
Mhm.
we can do that, then although each teacher still has their unique strengths, and in September, they're all talking to the dancers about the same idea. And now, instead of the dancers hearing 100 different corrections, they're hearing one correction 100 different times in 100 different ways. And
Mhm.
now they're actually by the end of a single week, they're like, "Oh, I've made some serious gains in what my teachers are saying," you know? Like, how many times have
Yeah.
you heard teachers say, like, they do it in ballet, but then they come to my lyrical class and they're not doing that. But I know they can do it because they were just doing it in ballet.
Right. Right. Well, and I think especially for young dancers in training, it's really easy to just think about like, this is my ballet brain, and now this is my tap brain, and this is hip hop brain, and not trying to or able to make some of the connections of how there truly is so much overlap, even though maybe here we're parallel, here we're turned out, or this leg goes higher versus staying lower. There's a lot that overlaps. And so by being able, as the instructors and the people looking at kind of the bigger picture, to help make those connections and have consistency is so important. I know I see that. So I'm also faculty in a physical therapy program. And that's one of the things we're always talking about is like, are we teaching, like, even though we may have very different lenses on a concept that we're teaching, do we ultimately have the same message coming from it? And we start to borrow slides from one another or, things like that, just so we are consistent throughout all the courses.
Yes, and you're reiterating the concepts that are important no matter what teacher they have. There's like this
Mhm.
reiteration of what you know they're gonna need to hear more than once.
Mhm.
All right, we're hearing that again because this is really important and, and we're gonna, like, really dive into it. I love that. I
Mhm.
mean, it's so true, and it's funny because, like you said, there's so much overlap despite no matter what genre we're in. And we often get the question, "Okay, I see your training program. What genre is it?" And we're like, "Well, actually, it's to be honest with you, it's not really a genre. We just take the body and we follow the body's design for technique." So if it's an Alyssa line, that line's gonna be the same in lyrical as it is in ballet. So we just break down, okay, what do the dancers need to understand and be able to strengthen in order
Mhm.
to achieve this line? And then from there, they can use that line for any technique that calls for it and any genre that calls for it. So it's not really like it's not ballet based, but it's more just like the body's design, like, is
Mhm.
is how we kind of unfolded it all.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and it makes me think like for a few years now, I've been a guest lecturer for a master's program in dance education where we talk about injury reduction stuff. And when I first started teaching, like the first 3 years or so of it, it was within this course that was popular dance styles, and it was an opportunity for educators to get exposed to a variety of different genres, and I mean different. So, like, one year it was hip hop, West African dance, and Chinese ribbon dancing. And
Oh,
the
okay.
professor who brought me in as a guest lecturer was like, "Also, can you figure out how to tie all of this together in the stuff that you're teaching?" And I'm like, "I know nothing about 2 of the 3 that you just told me about, but let me see what I can find." So I went on YouTube and did my little search of things and started just
Sure did.
watching the videos. And, I know missing a lot of nuance and context and that kind of thing by not actually taking classes, but watching the videos, starting to appreciate, well, they all are pretty, like, grounded. They're more into, bending into their knees, more intricate footwork that I'm seeing, a lot less upper body and torso move, and things like that with the different genres that I was looking at. And so it was a really interesting sort of forced study of extraordinarily different dance styles, of what is similar and what is different between them. It was an interesting project.
Was it so like, how did it turn out? Is this something that you ended up being so proud of? How did it feel teaching it?
Yeah, I think it ended up being really interesting because it it made me, one, just appreciate the value of the skill of being able to analyze movement and understanding, like, what are some of the components that go into this, and then being able to share that with the other dancers. They were learning the dance styles in the morning, and then they were in my class in the afternoon, so we got to kind of link back with anatomy, or, if this element was really hard for you, here's an exercise that maybe ties back into what was a struggle this morning, and
Oh,
that kind of stuff. And it was
wow.
so interesting. It was super cool.
I love the idea that you had the movement, like, they took the class, and then you came in and dissected.
Mhm.
That's really awesome because it's so fresh on their mind and also experientially, they were just doing it. And so now for them to dissect it, Be like, oh, I got these corrections, and now we're talking about like the body's design, and like now I understand that this correction probably came from this, like needing more alignment here, needing more strength here, even
Mhm.
understanding like the movement patterns, getting in and out of that position. Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, it was super fun. I'm glad in retrospect that I was sort of forced into that by suggestion of the professor who brought me.
You're like, surprise, Chinese ribbon dance. Like,
Exactly. I don't know what that is. Maybe I've seen it. I don't know. But yeah, it ended up being super interesting. And I think also like this idea of, building the skill of being able to analyze dance movement and understand components of what it is that we're working on is really helpful when we're thinking about, even for example, a pirouette. It's easy to think about, well, I have my prep, I have my turn, and I have my landing. That seems like three kind of distinct things that are happening, but needing to appreciate, well, you need to have power and control at your foot and ankle so that you can get into a releve position. You need to be able to get, if you're in retire with your leg as you're turning, you need abdominal control, you need turnout control on your legs, and, you need shoulder stability. There's so much that goes into this movement that we do a million times in a class, that if we have components of that that are breaking down, we're not going to have a successful pirouette. And so learning some of those pieces and the anatomy that goes along with it can help unlock some of that as well, which I think is super fun.
that is so true. I feel like there's so many anatomical components to it. And I think dancers sometimes are just like, okay, you're prep, like kind of like you said, those three parts, almost like three movements that they need to accomplish versus these are the areas that you need to really engage and understand anatomically for this to happen. Because I see
Mhm.
like, and I'm sure you see so many, I mean, a pirouette could have a bazillion corrections,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And so, but we see so many dancers that are great turners, and I only put that in quotation marks because of what I'm about to say next, but they're not actually on releve,
Hmm.
And so you're like, okay, you're getting a lot of rotations. So technically, like you are turning, but anatomically, your body's not in its strongest position to do this successfully. And even it's funny because you think to get that to happen, the amount of learning curve to even stand on your foot in a different way for you to be on your highest releve and how the weight is going to be held. And like now you're not pressing back into your knee, probably not going into hyperextension, probably not sitting back in your hips in order to get onto that highest releve and still like sustain it. It's probably going to go back to you doing a single
Hmm.
because now you're actually your weight and how your body is responding to it is completely different,
Yes.
you know? I feel
Yes.
like it's like when I tell dancers this sometimes when they get frustrated in that regard. I'm like, it's almost like your room's slightly messy, but your mom tells you to clean it. And now you're like trying to pull out your drawers and you're trying to like pull everything that wasn't really in its right spot out of the closet. You're trying to go under your bed and like find, like get it all
Hmm.
nice. And it looked like a little messy before, but pretty good. But once you start pulling things out of like the areas they were crammed in, now it looks like a wreck. But when you put it back where it belongs, like think of how amazing your room is. It's organized, you can find anything you need, all this stuff is happening, but the process to get there looks a little crazy and it's
Yeah.
probably pretty frustrating. If you walked in your room at that point, you'd be like, okay, this just blew up.
Yes.
This isn't what I feel like it's supposed to look like.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and and similarly, when we have those like we build our muscle memory a certain way, it's gonna look and feel bad until it's
Yeah.
right again.
Yeah. And learning to be able to sort of convert some of that muscle memory between genres also. Like I know for myself growing up as a studio-based dancer doing ballet, tap, jazz, hip hop, all the things growing up, and then moving to West Coast swing when I was an adult, there are certain things, like for example, in West Coast swing, when we do single footed spins with a partner, they are almost exclusively inside turns on our right foot with our right arm up And it's actually more correct to not be in much of a releve and to not spot.
Stop it.
So
So you're like relearning the whole
learning,
system.
right? Exactly. And so, there are times where, like, when I'm taking lessons and getting corrections in West Coast swing, they're like, "Oh, you're way too high up. You need to be more grounded," and all of that. I'm like, it's decades of ballet training telling me to get as high up on my foot as humanly possible. This is going to take some time to break this down and know how to switch when I'm in a given class or working on something different.
Yeah, you're like, "I'm gonna need a moment
Yeah.
because this is against everything I've ever done."
Mhm. Mhm.
But you know what? It's so fun because that's the design of that dance. And so
Mhm.
you're like, "You gotta honor it." You have to honor that that's what it is, and knowing that, like, technical elements are different. Like, even sometimes when I watch the difference between tap and, oh my gosh, clogging,
Mhm.
and I'm like, some of this is in line, but some of it is not the same. There are these fascinating differences where sometimes when I would adjudicate clogging, I'm like, you know what? I'm not even going to touch on this because as a person that was trained very deeply in tap, I don't feel comfortable saying that what you're doing is wrong. You can easily tell when it's right.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, that's the power, that's the strength I want to see, that's this and that's that. But the differences, the variations are so unique that it's hard to look at it and be like, that's wrong because sometimes it's not, in a different genre. And you're
Mhm.
like, well, that is wrong in tap, but essentially it might not be, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So, but that's what makes it so special. And that's what makes dance so unique is like the
Mhm.
ability to understand the technique of it. And this is what I try to tell teachers and dancers too. It's like if you understand your body's design and you can honor the safety behind it and like the limitations that you're currently working with that you can develop out of, but
Mhm.
these are your current limitations, then you can do this cool abstract choreography. You can do these unique things. You can, and I even was talking recently to somebody about I don't love when people prep parallel and they turned out.
Mhm.
I don't think your body can stabilize that because you're trying to access rotators. They're not like engaged. But I tell dancers like, hey, say you had this choreography and you're prepping in this parallel second position, and now you're pulling it into a turned out coupe turn. Think about your anatomical design here. You technically are not going to make that prep parallel. But if the choreography is calling you to be parallel, make your front this corner. So instead of this being your front and you're connecting everything here and engaging it, hold the rotators and connect them when you're to the quarter point. And at that
Mhm.
point, you can actually engage rotation and connect it with the muscles activated correctly. But if you know your body, you can get into those abstract positions and get out in and out of them safely.
Yes.
If you're just throwing this technique, that's actually very unstable, right?
Mhm. Mhm. One of the things that I also have thought about as we've been talking about some of these different elements and, teacher trainings and the apparel that you have and all of that, I think being able to put together some of those different pieces and have this guide of what your trainings provide for teachers can be really helpful. One thing that I've sometimes seen when I am teaching dance educators is if certain things came to them fairly easily as a dancer, they don't necessarily know how to cue it well for the dancers who are struggling with it. So whether it is flexibility, turnout, someone who naturally has a ton of turnout, it's a lot harder to be like, well, you should feel it here because maybe they're not even feeling it in the same way and being able to access the
Yes.
same things.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I do notice like and I think we get into this and we won't go too deep down this hole, but I think we get into this sometimes when we hire very young dancers as master teachers because typically if they're that good that young, they probably haven't processed really how they're doing it.
Mhm.
Typically if they're like above and beyond the technique level you typically see, a lot of that might have been naturally there and then they're developing on top of that. And so often they haven't had that experience of looking at a dancer and and having to break it down and having to figure out what's working, what's not working. And so sometimes I look at dancers like that and I'm like, it might be a harder process for you to become a teacher because you didn't have to really think about it like this for yourself. Whereas some of the dancers that get in there and they are struggling at first, but they have like that work ethic, like that momentum, that discipline, and they keep showing up and they keep showing up and they start to like figure out what's working for their body, what isn't, why did that work, why doesn't that work, I'm like really fighting for this, I finally got it, yes, I've been fighting for this for months, I finally understand it. They've broken down that process so many times to even achieve it in their own body that
Yeah.
sometimes they're the more natural teacher because they're like, actually, I remember this. This was really hard
Mhm.
for me, you know? And so I think you're right in saying that and saying like sometimes there can be a disconnect between a dancer that might be naturally flexible and really understanding why the body functions that way because for them it
Mhm.
just does, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Well, and I
And I
bet
know.
you see a lot in
Mhm.
physical therapy as well that a lot of dancers that are naturally flexible are they struggle gaining strength. And those dancers that are really powerful and strong, they have this limitation on flexibility. So you're always kind of trying to get those gains, right?
Mhm. Well, and one of the things too with dancers who are more hypermobile, they can struggle getting strength. They can struggle controlling that hypermobility in a safe way. And if they're super loosey goosey all over the place or in specific joints, they also have a harder time sensing where they are in space, that idea of proprioception. And so, if you're asking them to achieve a certain alignment or a certain position, matching those lines, thinking of like the younger dancers again, they might be like, where do you want? I can't tell where I'm supposed to be. And so sometimes having extra flexibility is seen as sort of a superpower for some dancers where it's like, ooh, you can do the cool stuff. But if it's too extreme and can't be controlled or can't access some of those other things, it can be something that is really challenging for them to be able to progress forward as quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the instability that it's hard for like maybe the untrained eye to see, where you're
Mhm.
like, oh, you know what? Actually, when you landed that, you were really unstable. Or when you were doing that almost overextension, your supporting leg was bowing in because you're not stabilizing your body. And so
Mhm.
that's like, I'm sure an element you see as well a lot where it's like the lines from an outside perspective, when we see these pictures, we're like, oh, look at their lines. The lines are there. But then from like a trained eye, you're kind of like, do we see, like, look at the supporting leg and the knees bowing in and like the arch in the foot's collapsing. Their
Mhm.
hips are like really, they're in a very unstable position that they can't really keep going for long term,
Yeah.
so they're going to have to start to understand it at some point or else you're going to really face some issues with that dancer. The deterioration
Mhm.
level before they even feel the pain that's happening is, I mean, and you see it. I'm sure you see it a lot where like the dancer's almost so injured before a professional gets their hands on them and the deterioration that's happened, but they didn't know?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think it's something where particularly if I see a dancer who is very hypermobile and they've been exclusively training at a studio that maybe either just has really big classes all the time or has less experienced instructors or folks who maybe can't pinpoint or don't have time to do some of that very individual stuff. Sometimes those are the young dancers then that come in with like a laundry list of things because their body is struggling anyways, and then the teachers maybe don't have the ability to support in one way or another, to kind of counterbalance that. And so it can be really interesting working with those dancers to help them figure out their own body and also figure out how to communicate with their teachers of like, here's what I need, or here's what I'm struggling with, or, just give them words to be able to have those discussions too.
Yeah, like giving them the vocabulary to understand what they're really experiencing and why it's not right for their body. And also
Mhm.
like, like the idea of them accessing like communication around red light and green light pain, where it's like, this is a sensation. This isn't something that's going to lead you to injury. This is just part of the process of growing. Unfortunately, with dance, it's like it's
Mhm.
uncomfortable. But then these are red light pains that if you can't ignore this, if you feel this in class, you have to pull your teacher aside. They might not have seen your knee pop out, but that's really dangerous. Or and piggybacking on earlier when you were like the dancers who, kind of have it come naturally to them and then become teachers, some of these concepts might feel harder to like start to integrate. And then they're trying to teach dancers at a higher level. And just circling back to that with as we were creating our training program, we were like, it's okay to want your dancers to be at a higher level. We
Mhm.
all want our dancers to be at a stronger level, and it's not out of reach. And so I think a lot of
Right.
times when when teachers are like, I'm not exactly sure how to break it down to this level, we just bypass it and we're like, you know what? My dancers are actually pretty strong. I'm just going to keep going in the direction they're going, not really seeing that the underlying like instability is there. And
Mhm.
so one thing with our program is just saying like, this is your top level technique that you're working on. Let's break it down to all the fundamentals and get you there quick, But how do we break down the fundamentals in a way that like, even if you didn't have to process it like this as a child, you can easily help your dancers process it in a
Mhm.
kind of a seamless fashion where it feels natural to you. So even the concept of taking a plie and think about a plie and grand plie second, right?
Mhm.
Dancers are typically sitting there. And teacher, it is hard to know, especially if there's a big class. Is my dancer accessing the rotation there? Are they just sitting there? And it can look good from far away. And so, how can we really check the range of motion and make sure that there's some resistance on it, that the dancers
Mhm.
understand this placement? And so, one thing we talk about, and this is just an example of like how it kind of integrates into teachers that haven't had to, like, in their own training, haven't had to think about breaking it down, but we're like, think about turnout as two directions, right? Your rotation, so like really activating that turnout sensation, right, at the top of the
Mhm.
leg, and then also your range of motion. So you're going to want to hold your rotation parallel, right? You're going to want to rotate the femurs and lift them off lift that alignment. But then we also want our range of motion so activating from parallel to turned out, right? And so if
Mhm.
you're playing and grand plie turned out, are your dancers just sitting there? Or if you got behind them and tapped their IT band, could you feel them actually pressing back into you and like really trying to resist that range of motion in a direction that's constantly giving them stability and support? So like just even little cues like that, if a teacher hadn't ever had to struggle through that, they might just be like, okay, grand plie second. Wow, beautiful, hold it. And it does look beautiful, but it's not strong, right? And so giving them these really tangible resources and takeaways to be like, okay, your dancers are doing it and they're doing it in a way that I want to put this in quotes too, like that they've done it before. They've done a grand plie in second. So it's not a huge learning curve. We're just
Mhm.
adding cues to this process that's gonna make sure that they endure and they get results, and that later when they go into a grand plie second, maybe they're even landing something pretty cool in that position, that their knees aren't popping in, they're not losing that placement and stability, and you can get them to that next level technique way faster, right?
Mhm, exactly. Yeah, they know what it is that they're going for, they know how to do it effectively and efficiently and safely and all the different things that need to go into it, and not have to work so hard or think so hard or, it's just kind of, mm, that muscle memory again because you've been training it along the way.
Yeah. When you think too, I'm sure you've seen this 100 times, like a billion times at this point, right? Where you're like, a dancer gets a long combo and they're in pretty decent placement in the beginning of the combo, like
Mhm.
and then the placement starts to go, but they don't wanna stop because isn't that how we are as dancers? We're just like, "No, I can get through it. I'm gonna keep going.
The
I don't wanna
show must go on.
stop. The show must go on." But then it's like the double alignment has gone. And so now they're doing 12 more reps with alignment that's not that strong, but
Mhm.
they're building the muscle memory there. So it's like, "Oh, no, you only did 4 in the right alignment and 12 in this alignment, so really this alignment's the one that your muscles are gonna remember." So don't, you're like, I'd almost rather you do the 4 really good. You feel like your alignment's
Mhm.
slipping, shake it out, get there again. In the end, maybe you
Yep.
only did 8 or 12 in the good alignment, but you didn't do 12 in the, and so that muscle memory is still being built. You're still, and it's actually way more powerful than if you had pushed through to the end, right?
Mhm. Yes. And as they're getting more fatigued, that's where risk starts going up of getting injured along the way. So all the more reason to not just keep going when things are starting to kind of break down along the way.
Yeah, you're like, you're tired and your placement's off. This is a recipe
Mhm.
for disaster.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I think at this point it is time for a special segment on the show. So, on every episode of Dance Med Spotlight, we have the final bow, basically the take home message. So, if there is maybe one or two things that you hope people take away from listening or watching this episode, what do you hope that they walk away with?
I think the main thing I would love to really impart is that the fundamentals or the basics, those are your advanced training. So I think anytime you see like an advanced athlete, what do they do first in their practice? They do the fundamentals and they do them over and over and over again until it's just second nature to them. And so I think as dancers, we shouldn't put ourselves in a different category than any other athlete would. I think really, if we can really understand our fundamentals of our body is designed to do that, if we our muscle memory is built around that, then everything else we want will come, but it'll also come a lot faster. So don't jump past that. And then also allow yourself grace because dance is very hard. And unlike other sports that can get emotional, when you're creating art, it's also deeply personal. And so allow yourself the process of an athlete, but allow yourself the grace of an artist and just really, really understand like what it takes to bring out a side of yourself that no one else has the gift to bring out. Like every dancer is going to have a different gift that they get to impact in the world. And so if you
Mhm.
can touch somebody with your unique design, with your unique movement quality, with your unique story, then what you're going to do in the dance industry and in the world as a large is going to be so impactful and truly make a difference. And so I think that's why we really dance, right? The technique's there, but really the heart of it is the passion of changing the world through our movement and through our story. So always lean back into that and give yourself grace in the process.
I love both of those things so much. The last and certainly not least is the shameless plug. So, this is your opportunity to promote whatever you want to promote. So, the stage is yours.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, you can find our company. It's at Relative Motion Dance on Instagram. You can also find us relativemotiondance.com. And really, we have an app with all of our technique training. And so you can get in there, and there's a lot of free content in the app. So if you just kind of want to see what we were talking about, jump in, get free content. From there, we do online and in person teacher trainings and certifications, but we also do something that's like the heart of what we love, which is our studio integrations. We go into the studio, we personalize the experience for the teachers, and then they learn on their dancers during a dance intensive. So if you want a very personalized experience, very immersive, jump in and find us for studio integration.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Cara. It was great getting to chat with you about all of this.
Thank you for the invite. This was so fun.
Dance Med Spotlight is hosted and produced by Alyssa Arms. We discuss all things dance medicine. This has been another episode from Dance Med Spotlight. The Dance Med Spotlight is intended for educational purposes only. No clinical decision making should be based solely on one source. While care is taken to ensure accuracy, factual errors can be present.